Okay, welcome everybody. This is a highly anticipated program. We're going to be visiting with Chris Justice, who is the executive director of Footloose Montana, Toby Walroth, who is the president of the Montana Trappers Association. So, John, take it away.
Yeah, for those of you who have already voted, this might be a non-issue, and I realize people are kind of slowly, progressively voting as the election season rolls on. But in your ballot, there's Initiative 177, which I guess I'll let the advocates for the initiative kind of describe it, and if there's any controversy, we'll let the opponents for it. But yeah, we have Chris Justice here from Footloose Montana. They have been advocates for I-177, hoping that it passes. So I'll give Chris an opportunity to kind of introduce himself, his organization, and I-177, if you would.
Yeah. So, hot mic. Yeah. So, my name's Christopher Justice, and I'm the current executive director of Footloose Montana. There we go. I'll talk across it. It's almost as if I've never done this before, even though I've done it many times. And Footloose Montana is a 501c3 nonprofit that generally promotes the issue of trap-free public lands in Montana. And most of Footloose's work is teaching trap release workshops and things like that. But members of Footloose formed the committee Montanans for Trap-Free Public Lands, which is the ballot initiative committee to carry I-177. And so I was part of the group that wrote the initiative, and I've been a volunteer on the committee collecting signatures and now campaigning. And basically, from our perspective, I-177 is a ban on commercial and recreational fur trapping on public lands. There's provisions for the state to still trap for health and human safety purposes, for research purposes, and then there's provisions after non-lethal alternatives have failed for the state to work with ranchers to still trap predators in cases of genuine predation on livestock. So that's the initiative in a nutshell. I don't think I need to go into too much of our motivations behind it right now, because I think we have plenty of time to talk.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself personally, how you got involved in the organization and why you're involved?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in Great Falls, and I went to the University of Montana. My degree is through the Native American Studies Department with a focus in Indigenous Resource Policy and Management. And I worked in the nonprofit sector. I actually worked with a college radio station, got my nonprofit background there. And I worked on...
Well, of course, this radio station is nonprofit, too, so don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. That's not making a profit.
Not intentionally,
That's two different things. Yeah. But anyways, so I worked on other issues. I was part of general community advocacy things, and a lot of what I worked on in college was like the decriminalization of homelessness and things like that. But then after college, I was looking for a nonprofit job, and Footloose had posted for an executive director, and my ex-wife was helping me look for jobs. And I just started researching it, and I had never trapped, but I had lived on a commercial cattle ranch when I was much younger, and my stepdad trapped out there. And so I had been around it off and on, and my uncle trapped. And I have hunted and fished, and I used to butcher with my uncle and my dad and all that kind of stuff. My dad still farms out in Washington now. And so it was an issue that I was tangentially aware of. But then when I did my background research to see if I'd be interested in applying for the job, my side of it seemed pretty straightforward, and I had the skill set needed, and it's something that I wanted to be a part of. And so it just all kind of happened really organically, and then the last couple years have been intense.
All right. Well, now we're going to shift gears a little bit, actually a lot of it. We're going to speak with Toby Walroth. Toby is the president of the Montana Trappers Association. They are against I-177. So, Toby, hopefully you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us about you, your personally or your group's opposition and why for I-177 briefly.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Much appreciated. For our perspective on I-177, it is a very extreme and radical measure that would eliminate an entire user group from public lands. So we oppose it for a variety of reasons, which we'll for sure get into. I started trapping with my father when I was about 5 years old. It has enriched my outdoor experience. And for a variety of reasons, I have maintained a close connection to the land. through trapping, hunting, and fishing. And now my career as an outdoor writer, I basically hunt, trap, fish, and write about it. And as a field director for the Sportsman's Alliance, president of the Montana Trappers, and consultant to the ballot initiative committee opposing I-177, that is Montanans for Wildlife and Public Lands Access, I've dedicated my life to preserving the things that I think are very important to sportsmen in Montana, and trapping for sure is one of those things that we need for effective wildlife management, as has been proven for decades in this state. I went to college. I got a couple of degrees. One is in environmental science, natural resource management, and planning. The other one is wilderness recreation. And both of those degrees certainly opened my eyes to a lot of issues that we face in this state and around the country regarding public land use and access. And so it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And now that I'm a dad and have a 5-year-old son following me around in the woods with everything I do, whether I'm just hiking a mountain somewhere or hunting, trapping, fishing, canoeing, boating, whatever I'm doing with my family, it's so important to me and to so many Montanans. I think it's something worth fighting for, so I certainly am.
All right. Oh, now we're going to open up the phone lines. We invite you to call in. 721-1290 is the number to call in. Before we get there, though, I have a question I'd like you both to answer. A lot of people look at their ballot. They won't have a strong opinion on this issue because they don't trap, and they might just pass over it. They might not say yes or no. And I guess I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to give a reason why someone should pick a side. Why is it an important enough reason for them to pick a side on this?
Okay, we're going to do that when we come back from the break. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Ordinarily, in a forum like this, if there were two candidates, we would ask them to ask questions that both candidates could answer. Because both running for the same head, but we have polar opposites here with this particular initiative. So we invite, if you're for, if you're against, if you have questions about what it's all about getting deeper into the initiative, what it would ban, what it wouldn't ban, that sort of thing, give us a call. We have 4 lines open. We'd love to get them all rocking this morning because these individuals are going to be with us all the way until 10 o'clock this morning. So let's get this conversation started. And, of course, you really make it happen with your phone calls. 721-1290. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. This is Talkback, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Now, John, you just asked a question a moment ago. We have Francis waiting on the line, but hang on, Francis. We'll get to you in just a moment. So.
Yeah, I was hoping you might be able to clarify for those that are listening that might not understand this issue much at all, to give them a little bit of perspective as to what's at stake in your point of view, either for or against the I-177 initiative. When it comes to trapping on public lands or public safety.
So Toby, you're up first. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Yeah.
You can move that microphone right in front of you. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Right, I'm not a professional radio guy.
You got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things at stake with I-177, and our ballot initiative committee is the Montanans for Wildlife and Public Lands Access. And so it's ultimately a twofold issue. We see this as a major threat to public lands access and to wildlife management in the state of Montana. But also it has far-reaching implications where now ranchers who can, if they have a depredation complaint, they can immediately go out and remove that animal. I-177 would remove the use of traps immediately. They'd have to wait 30 days. Many of our ranchers in Montana utilize leased public lands, and so that private livestock on public land, the management and protection of that livestock would be reduced and replaced with government agencies. So we see it as an increase in bureaucracy, which is a negative. We also see an extreme expense to the taxpayers of Montana, which we have evaluated, which was evaluated by the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So we see it as a very impactful ballot measure to the citizens of Montana, and it's not just about trapping or trappers or fur trappers. It has implications far beyond that.
When FWP did their analysis, what did they evaluate it at?
We have two different evaluations. The first one was done by Dr. Inman back in March or April, May, somewhere in that time frame. And he included in his analysis the fur sales in Montana. And that came to $2.8 million impact on the economy of Montana. By removing 5,000 active trappers, it costs a lot of money to the state and takes away that revenue. The second evaluation was from the legal counsel of FWP, who would ultimately be responsible for incurring the costs associated with I-177. That dollar value came out at a minimum annual expense of $422,038. That cost would include replacing the activities that trappers currently do for free, such as identifying wolf locations and other fur-bearing information gathered solely and only by trappers, but also vehicles, gasoline expense, costs for equipment and supplies, and would also require technicians to do a whole host of activities. And so between those two evaluations, we're over $3 million annual impact to Montanans.
Okay, so Chris, if you wouldn't want to respond to that, please.
Yeah, I guess what I'll mostly do is respond to what Toby said. For starters, the idea that there's going to be just this new Cambrian explosion of predator populations after something like I-177 passes because of things like ranchers being encouraged to try non-lethal alternatives first, I think is rooted in a fear that that has been proven to not be the reality in many other states. With states like Colorado, Oregon, Idaho, there's been studies done recently that have been so comprehensive about non-lethal alternatives when it comes to predators that even the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service lately have really changed their tune on how on trying non-lethal management first because it's effective, because turbofladry is effective, because range riders are effective, because dogs are effective. And I guess I don't look at this kind of thing as a bureaucracy increase because Fish, Wildlife, and Parks already exists. We already have a bureaucracy. We have an organization that hunters and fishers like to say was started for hunting and fishing that exists to do just that, to manage wildlife. And I don't think it's a bad thing to give those experts the right to manage. Now, I think that we probably most heavily disagree on whether or not trapping is part of the wildlife management model. There's been statements made by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks before that it's not, because even though the fur bearer coordinators for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks are certainly probably, you could say, on the trapper's side, it doesn't mean that they administrate the commercial and recreational fur trapping program for those purposes.
Tell you what, let's get to the phone because I want to get these folks are waiting. So, Francis, you have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to ask Christopher Justice, what is your opinion on the BMPs and their impact on current trapping activities both on public and private lands for future?
What is BMT?
Francis. The best management practices.
Okay.
Best management practices.
BMP, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, Chris?
I haven't heard that acronym before. I mean, I expected that callers that wanted to trip us up would be throwing a lot of jargon at us. So I mean, I guess like there was a lot of points that Toby made that I didn't get a chance to refute. So,
please go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's just if Francis wants to call back and explain that farther, I'm more than happy to address it.
So please continue because I interrupted.
No, it's fine. It's just that the other thing that I just really wanted to touch on is that I guess I don't feel like currently the trappers are less than 1% of the state's public lands users, and we have to look at public lands as a utilitarian thing. Public lands are held in trust for all users, which I understand makes trappers feel like they have an access point. But when our wildlife that are also held in public trust are trapped non-target heavily, and when endangered species and protected species end up in the traps to the point that the state loses lawsuits left and right when it comes to wolverines and Canadian lynx and things like that, then you have to look at it like there's a flip side to it too. And I guess I would also say that in terms of this financial impact, Tim Fox, the state attorney, gets to write the financial impact statements for initiatives. Tim Fox is a conservative, so if you're trying to make this a bipartisan issue, which I don't think it is, then you could say that he's not on the liberal side. And Tim Fox assessed it at $61,000 and then said, of course, that there was a cost for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that was yet to be determined, which is what gave our opponents the latitude to go seek that out. But it's still an entirely estimated number based off of fear of the worst situation. And the legal counsel for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Rebecca Doctor, is the person that gets quoted a lot for coming up with this number. But I mean, she is a person who has a vested interest in this too. And when I was in the legislature and she was asked how many dogs get trapped per year, she said, "Oh, we don't have immediate access to those numbers when Fish, Wildlife, and Parks tracks it." So it's not like there aren't people within this existing bureaucracy who aren't trying to maintain the bureaucracy. We get painted as the special interest group and as the emotional ones, but for the most part, it seems like the fear rhetoric comes from the other side.
Okay. So we're up against a break, so thank you both, and we have another hour yet to go yet, so we're going to take a quick commercial break. Chris Justice joining us here in the studio along with Toby Walrath. We're talking about I-177. That's the initiative to ban trapping on public lands in Montana, and we're going to come right back with more in a moment. And we are back on Talkback, 721-1290. I'm going to make the most of our time. Got about 2.5 minutes, so let's get Keith on the line. Keith, what's your question for our folks in studio?
Well, my question and statement deals with issues regarding the serious problem with I-177 with regard to potential privacy information getting out to the extremists or animal rights folks that tend to cause some problems at times. We've talked about the high costs, problems with managing wildlife and public access, but one of the deficiencies in I-177, in particular paragraph 2B of new section 4, exposes farmers and ranchers to these potential attacks by animal rights folks due to the undefined, publicly verifiable information requirement. As we've seen in the past, and most recently with the Pease Farm attacks, the harassment of university students, there's a potential risk out here. And I'd like them to address how that risk may be mitigated, and is there any culpability for folks that have created this?
Okay, we're going to ask Toby to start on that one, so we have about a minute and a half. Actually, that question is pretty much directed to you, Chris. So if you want to just jump in there, we have about a minute and a half. Go ahead.
You okay with that, Toby? Yes. Okay. When you write an initiative, one of the things that you do is if you're being smart about it, is you bring in an initiative lawyer and you have them vet it. And so a lot of the times those kind of things end up in your initiative language because you're just trying to be thorough, and so those clauses mostly exist for the fact that there will be, if a rancher is going to, report to the state that they're having a predation problem, of course, that's going to end up in public record, right? But I don't really think it's correct to call me an animal rights activist or to call our group animal rights activists. I mean, if I am a hunter and an angler and I eat meat, and then it comes down to different environmental practices. B, we get death threats too, graphic ones. I save them on my phone and I save the voicemails, and I don't think that the Montana Trappers Association or Toby or anybody wants that to happen to us either. I don't think, and in fact, in general, looking at the history of all this, there's no above average amount of liberal terrorism on ranchers who seem to be fairly secure and talk about us as emotional and soft. I just think that's a non sequitur question, really.
Okay, as we're going to come right back after the top of the hour. Continue. We have another hour yet to visit, so we'll be back. Stay with us. Okay, we are back continuing our discussion about I-177. Chris Justice with us, Executive Director of Footloose Montana. Toby Walrath also with us, the President of the Montana Trappers Association. Now, Toby, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to what Chris was saying, the question that we had just before the top of the hour. So please go ahead.
Thanks for that. I think the caller...
Turn the mic right to your face. There you go. Perfect.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the caller the last caller was not necessarily throwing accusations at people like Christopher Justice, that they are all animal rights activists. I think it was more about, I interpreted the question as being more like a threat that is opened up, that doesn't currently exist. When we have to publicly demonstrate as landowners that we have depredation issues and that our solution to that issue might be the use of lethal means, it opens up a public opportunity for those groups who are extreme, radical, and dangerous, and we know that those exist, to have information about where those people are, and it's a danger to the family. So I think that is a very real concern and one I hadn't thought of before, honestly. But I do think that was really the point of the last caller's question, and I think it is valid.
Okay, let's get back to the phones. Say good morning to Jim. Jim, you're up first. You're on with our guests, Chris Justice and Toby Walroth. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. You know, it's interesting that this is coming up in Montana. I lived down in Arizona for about 18 years. I actually did an outdoor radio show for about 13. And I saw this happen in Arizona where they took away public lands for trapping. And in the Prescott Valley area, the coyotes ran rampant and almost decimated the entire antelope herd up there to the point where you had the Game and Fish Department coming up, and they were actually shotgunning out of planes and out of helicopters to try to control the populations because they ran so rampant. So the idea of taking away the traps and using non-lethal methods and so on, I haven't seen it happen yet. And I've been down there and been a part of it for a number of years down in Arizona. So I don't see how it's going to benefit us to eliminate trapping from public lands. And another thing that was kind of interesting, because I used to do a lot of work with the commissioners, game and fish commissioners down there, is it's just another step towards the anti-hunting movement getting, and I know you guys say, no, but trust me, I lived it down there. The anti-hunting movement, well, if we can get trapping off of public lands, why can't we get hunting off of public lands? And I saw that happen, or try to happen, in numerous areas down there in Arizona. So all I can say to all the people here, that are listening, vote against this bill.
All right, thanks for the call. So, Chris, do you want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Seems like you got a lot of friends calling in this morning. I mean, for one, again, I'm willing to address any question, and I'm glad people are calling in, and I like talking to the opposition. That's why I have my job, But first of all, the problems in Arizona are different than the problems in Montana. And so and I know that Arizona has not passed a comprehensive ban or anything similar to the exceptions that we put in or whatever, because obviously we researched all the history of all of this as going in. But, it would be like saying, well, in L.A. they're dealing with urban coyotes running rampant. And it doesn't apply here because we are not L.A. We're not Arizona. We have a different biome that we're dealing with. And it's not like, as the face of this initiative, it's not like I'm the only person behind this. We have biologists on our board. We have initiative experts. We've consulted with people from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I went and personally met with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and asked questions about management during the writing phase because we wanted to know. But there's a lot of things that, like, if in one valley, one coyote population exploded. For one, in our state, coyotes are managed by the Department of Agriculture, not by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And there's no reason that people couldn't protect animals or livestock if there was a problem by going out and hunting them and using a fair chase and safe method that doesn't threaten other wildlife. Two, coyote populations, according to neutral biology, not just according to people that back our initiative, according to research that goes back well before this was ever an issue in Montana, in terms of politics, coyotes are excellent at self-regulating. So if you're taking the coyote population as an example, coyotes can self-abort, and coyotes can get pregnant midterm, and they are biologically, their biological imperative is to survive. They have an instinctual imperative to manage their own population and to not run out of food sources. And I guess it's one of those things where I don't again think that currently trapping is the vanguard that's preventing these things from swallowing up wildlife. They've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. And
I want to give Toby a chance to respond for a minute and a half before our next break. Go ahead, Toby.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think it's interesting that Christopher and I pick up on different things. What I got out of that call was, there is evidence to suggest that there will be some changes that are very difficult to manage if trapping were to be removed from public lands in this state, as demonstrated in other states, but also that this really is a kind of foot in the door for anti-trapping organizations, and whether the proponents of I-177 at this time see the initiative as an anti-hunting opportunity or not. The fact is that since 1992, ballot initiatives have been used in states across the United States in various ways, and they focus on hound hunters or spring bear hunters, or they also focus on trappers and trapping. There is a group now called Montanans for Hunt-Free Public Lands. We see that organization sharing posts from Montana Trap-Free Public Lands, and I don't think that that's a coincidence.
All right, we're going to take a break, come right back. You guys are now officially rock stars. I want you to know, when all of our lines are filled, you guys are rock stars. So we appreciate that, and we're going to come right back. We have John, Boyd, Dave, and Rick, and they all want to visit with you. And if you can't get through on the phones, which may happen, we'd love to have your comments on our Facebook page, and we'll pass those along to our guests. We'll be right back. And we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number, and all four lines are full. We appreciate that. Chris Justice, Executive Director of Footloose Montana, sponsors of Initiative I-177. Also Toby Walroth, opposing that, the President of the Montana Trappers Association. So I want to be faithful to our callers and get right back to them. John, you are on Talkback with our guests. Hi.
Yeah, my question is for Chris there. His organization keeps defending that trapping is not a management tool used for fur bearers and predators, and I just do not understand this when we have draw areas for different state lands to help manage the fur bearers on those and the predators, and I'd just like him to explain that how trapping is not a tool being utilized today.
Okay, thanks for the call. So could you explain that, please, Chris?
Trappers want to trap, and agriculturalists, some have an investment in people trapping too for economic reasons. And because it's currently legal, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks manages a program. And so, of course, they're going to try to look at a district and say, this is what the yield can be while still being sustainable. But that is where the issue of non-target catches and the indiscriminate nature of trapping comes in. And so just because the state says, okay, we can afford to lose this population in an area doesn't mean that it's being done because the state explicitly needs that population to be managed. And the idea that, there are so many species that are trapped that aren't even, we get hung up on this predator issue, but there are so many species trapped that don't have a negative impact on the landscape that are still trapped. And so the fur bear management program, Brian Giddings and the former fur bear coordinator said that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does not administrate the commercial and recreational trapping program for wildlife management purposes, that it's strictly for hobbyists. And so just because something's legal and therefore the bureaucracy that exists, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has to manage it, doesn't mean that they're managing it, or that the trappers are the people that are out there, doing this. And I also just want to say one more thing before we get too far off track, and I'll be really quick about this.
Okay.
In terms of the anti-hunting thing, you have to remember that this is a democratic process, and that 30,000 plus qualified signatures for I-177 made the ballot. And you only have, it's not like we're out there poisoning people's minds and convincing them of things. Usually you have 2 seconds to talk to somebody on the street when they sign the ballot. You go over the basic points, they read the statement that the Attorney General agrees on, and they sign. A, I'm not anti-hunting. B, nobody I know within our organization is anti-hunting. I mean that honestly. Or anti-fishing. And C, there's just no chance of that happening. The culture around hunting and the culture around trapping are two very different things in the state of Montana. And the citizens, I don't know the hunt-free public lands thing. Honestly, I assumed that was created by our opponents because it's so spurious and it just doesn't even make sense, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. But I guess all I want to say is just that you have to remember that voters backed this to get this here.
Okay.
And the culture of hunting is different in Montana. It's not something to worry about.
Okay, Toby, go ahead. You want to respond to that? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. So I guess first of all, the signature gatherers were all paid, and they worked
That's
for
not true.
9 months. Many were paid to the tune of about $60,000. Also, we talk about species being managed for recreational use. We have ducks, pheasants, upland game birds, deer, elk, moose, mountain goats. We have a number of animals in the state of Montana that are managed in part for recreational opportunity and in part for need. Ranchers need elk removed. One of the best things you can do is hunt that population. They will move from the area. So I think that trapping is important. It's just as significant as hunting for use recreationally and for practical reasons. Now, the other thing is WMAs, like the Warm Springs area, trappers can apply for permits to trap in that area to remove muskrats, which, if left unattended, would and do and have cause damage to the levees and dams and so forth in those areas. So it's not that trappers aren't providing a service. We are. We're doing it for free, and we're doing it because we do enjoy the activity, and we're not costing taxpayers millions of dollars as would happen if I-177 passed.
Okay, let's get back to the phones, and I believe Boyd is next. Boyd, thank you for holding. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. This whole initiative bothers me, but specifically, they have gone in and changed some definitions. Their definition of animal means any non-human warm-blooded vertebrate. Where the regulations had previously said wildlife protected by state law, they've changed that to wild animal. And their definition of wild animal is any non-domestic animal, including reptiles and birds. So I assume that includes rattlesnakes. They have mentioned, that part of the selling of this is it's public land only. They do specifically include snares on private property in the regulations. But the big issue with me being ag-oriented here is if agriculture has a predation problem or a problem with the beaver in an irrigation diversion, on many of those actually are on public land, you have to, problem animal means a specific animal with a verified, documented history. So if a beaver is plugging an irrigation diversion, you have to not only employ non-lethal methods first to try to avoid the problem, but then you have to verify that that is the specific beaver that has been causing the problem. Lots of luck with that.
Boyd, forgive me for jumping in here, but I need you to come to a question because all of our lines are full.
Okay. They specifically prohibit conibear traps, even and which is the most effective way to get rid of beavers. So I guess my question is, it's not good for ag, and down the line I can see that's where this is headed. So anyhow, if you could address the agricultural issues, please.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, Chris, please go ahead.
We have a question from Facebook for the description of what are some of the non-lethal means you're advocating for in lieu of using conibear traps or the other traps that are provided for under I-177 or prevented by I-177.
I mean, I can probably answer both questions at once, but I'd need a minute and a half. I mean, more than a minute and a half because it's two questions, right?
We're up against a break in 2 minutes, so go.
First of all, the initiative is not meant to inhibit these processes. The initiative is meant to take it out of the hands of private individuals who have a vested interest in things besides just management. And the idea that, I mean, so sorry, there was a lot of ground covered there, and I'm just trying to formulate my response, and we're live. But for starters, when it comes to something like beaver, there are definitely times when beaver cause problems, but they also create great benefits for the environment. One of the first environmental laws Montana passed back when it was a territory was the cessation on beaver trapping because people realized how it affected the watershed, and that predates the modern science of ecology even. There was an instinctual understanding of their importance to the watershed. And there's this agricultural issue that gets brought up over and over again, but there's also still a lot of ag trapping that will occur on private lands that's unaffected. Everyone acts like every animal that is trapped or every animal that is hunted for agricultural purposes all occurs on public lands. In the last 2 seasons, only 14 of the wolves harvested by trapping were harvested on public lands. And the initiative language is not meant to prevent somebody from trapping a beaver if it's causing a genuine problem. It's just meant to say that is something that needs to be regulated by the state. And conibear traps are effective for beaver. I mean, there's no way that I'm going to dance around that. But the conibear traps are also extremely, extremely dangerous and lethal. And Montana is a changing landscape. Only 1/3 of our lands left are public. And research other states. Look at what happens as public lands dwindle and more people are around conibear traps. Look at Florida where kids end up in them. And it's not. And the conibear trap thing comes down to the fact that it's just too dangerous to have in a waterway around populations.
Okay, we're up against a break. As a matter of fact, we're a little bit over, so we're going to come right back, and I'm going to have Toby respond to that when we come back from the break. Dave, John, Tim, and Jeff, we'll be right back with you guys as well as our Facebook friends in a minute. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Talkback. We're discussing I-177 today. Chris Justice with us, Executive Director of Footloose Montana. Toby Walroth, President of the Montana Trappers Association. Toby, wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to what Chris said just before the break.
Sure. I think the last caller asked to address the agriculture issue, and I think that the current practices in Montana very much align with the use of traps and snares on private and public lands. And I know that there are alternative methods, but oftentimes those methods are very expensive, and the cost is incurred by the ag owners or the ag producers, and that's why they're concerned if they have to incur the cost that active trappers now do for free. It's just expensive for those ag producers. And if the state has to take over it, now there's additional costs incurred for that, so additional expense to the taxpayers of Montana. So it's a lose-lose when it comes to the economy of Montana. Also, Christopher did say that only 14 wolves were trapped on public lands last year, and I wonder how the folks who got up in arms over the one wolf over harvest with a quota of 4 in the greater Yellowstone area, I think it was Unit 316 recently. I mean, they just blew up the FWP phone lines over one wolf. So to say only 14 wolves were trapped seems a bit odd. Each of those wolves has an impact on the ecosystem, and I think that the removal of traps does impact our wildlife management. And there's a prime example.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, there's our oldest Facebook comment was about the other options, right? Non-lethal means or other types of traps. And I think this is a question that both of you can talk about, because obviously there's lots of different arrays of ways that we might harvest or prevent a species from being a problem. And I just kind of want you to talk about why, in Chris's or in the Footloose Montana position, why these are more necessary or better.
Yeah,
and then maybe for Chris, and maybe explain some of them, and maybe for Chris, why should we consider traps to be continued to use, and why won't these other types be fully useful?
Okay, so again, a lot of these questions require a lot of facts and a lot of information, so I'm going to try to move through this quickly. But first of all, the NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council, have done joint reports following Federal Fish and Wildlife Services and released reports in 4 states on how non-lethal methods could be applied. And the results have been overwhelmingly positive. Things like turbofladry, which is taking alternated colored flags and giving them an electric charge and stretching them out, is a huge deterrent for wolves. There are sound alarms that can be put up for wolves. Dogs have been shown to be 98% effective against wolves. And there's a great quote from a Colorado rancher who talks about how just investing in having herd guard dogs saved him so much money that it will pay for the dogs in perpetuity. And these are reports not generated by groups that aren't listed as endorsers of us. It's fairly neutral. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, the federals, who, traditionally people have jeered at them by calling them wildlife killing services. So just to give you an idea of where they've been in the past, they even now are starting to make this turn towards going out and teaching ranchers non-lethal methods, and they're subsidizing those costs and providing trip alarms and stuff at little to no cost. You can go on their website and apply for it, and it's easy. And when it comes to other animals, non-predator species like beavers, there are devices, stream flow devices, beaver deceivers. It takes a long time to explain how that works, but it essentially tricks a beaver into thinking that stream flow has been diverted, so they quit damming. And in that case, there is an inherent upkeep cost. But another thing is that, NGOs like Footloose Montana will continue to be around if this passes, and there are many people that are willing to chip in and say, like, okay, well, for certain situations, if there's going to be a higher upkeep cost because, say, there's a lot of debris flowing through the specific stream that's going to back up the stream flow device, then we'll write grants and we'll help provide, the people to go out there, just like we've gone out into the Lee Metcalf before and put up fencing around old growth trees to prevent beavers from taking them down.
Okay, so Toba, they'll give you a minute and a half to respond to that. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. In 1996, an organization called ProPaw pushed a ballot initiative in the state of Massachusetts, and they made the same claims that Christopher just did, that their organization would be around long-term and they'd help chip in and they would alleviate the cost inherently incurred through the use of these expensive non-lethal methods. That did not happen, and in fact, within 3 years, the population in the state of Massachusetts exploded past 6 times the value prior to that initiative being passed. And so the exact numbers? Oh, population of beavers, sorry. And so through the course of the next year or the next decade and a half, extreme changes had to be made. They did not undo the ballot initiative, but they had to create a new permitting system. And speaking with wildlife managers, which I am, a certified wildlife nuisance control operator, who attends conventions with other folks, they had to move beavers from one location to another, and they couldn't terminate those beaver. And so the costs to the state were extreme, and we for sure see the possibility of that happening in Montana. Costs incurred to ranchers, costs incurred to the taxpayers.
All right, we're going to take a break. Come right back. Dave, John, Tim, and Jeff. We're going to get you guys on here in just a moment as we continue our discussion in a moment. Okay, we're back. 721-1290. This is Talkback. We're discussing I-177. Chris Justice, Executive Director of Footloose Montana. Toby Walroth, also with us, President of the Montana Trappers Association. So let's get right back to the phones. It's what we like to do. Dave, you're on Talkback. Please go ahead.
Yeah, on the air?
Yes, sir. You're on, Dave. Please go ahead.
Yes, I've already voted against this, so to qualify myself first, I'm in total agreement with what Toby has already brought up. The only thing that I might add to it is most of the young generation, the outdoor people, got their first experience in the wildlife on a trap line when they were super young. I'm talking 5, 10, 12 years old, and it's been a great experience to take away from something like this. The only thing that I might mention to Chris, being a nonprofit, that he might look for another job in the Social Republic of Missoula to further his endeavors, but I hope it's not in trapping.
Do you have a specific question for Chris or to Toby?
I asked Chris directly, is there another nonprofit that he could get involved with in Missoula rather than try to pursue trapping, because I don't think there's a chance that that's going to ever pass.
Okay, all right, thanks for the call. So do you want to?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really interested in leaving my job, regardless of how it turns out. And,
sure.
I appreciate, that Toby doesn't just say to me, like, I think you're going to, abandon post. He goes back and says, well, there in this year that happened in Massachusetts, I think it's nice that in this dialogue that we can root in fact. But the fact of the matter is I'm not going anywhere. I like my job. The last 2 grants I wrote, both successful, are both about going out and doing talks about non-lethal methods. It's where I focused my energy lately.
Okay, so let's get back to the phone now. John, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for having me, guys. Really, this is sort of directed to Chris. First and foremost, I don't know Toby from anywhere, 0. I'm new to Montana. I'm a former owner of a wildlife control business from the state of Indiana. Back in the, mid-'90s when the fur prices crashed there, and then we had an animal rights movement go through there, the beaver populations exploded, muskrats, coyotes, and I started a wildlife business there. Became highly successful. Was more of an agent, independent agent for the state of Indiana, and was well respected. My business was very successful. We even couldn't keep up with it.
Now, forgive me for jumping in, but what exactly did you do? Did you manage hunts or trapping or what?
No. Well, we managed all beaver nuisance problems that were very serious. The rivers were backing up into. Here's the scenario: rivers were backing up due to the beaver dams, and we had hazardous waste areas there, where all that water could have got into hazardous waste storage areas. I mean, that's just one example, but pretty much we did beaver, muskrats, and coyotes.
Okay, so real quick, what's your question?
Well, the question is this idealism about outlawing trapping on public lands. And, Chris made a comment of these predators will self-manage themselves. Well, let me tell you how they self-manage themselves. They die of mange, starvation, different sorts of diseases, cannibalism, after they just pill it every pretty much wildlife we have. Let me go back. Well, someone made a comment of pheasants and turkeys and different forms of antelope, those kind of things. But I moved to Alaska, and we had an animal rights movement there, and they put political pressure where they let the wolves go unattended. So the state used to take out in these certain sections so many wolves a year to regulate that wolf population. Well, in my first years there, the political pressure stopped that. So what transpired from there was the wolves decimated, and I understand decimated. You couldn't find a moose track anywhere. Certain caribou herds were. Okay,
I'm so sorry to do this to you.
Yeah, I understand.
I got to let you go. We have so many people who want to get on. Do you have a specific question?
Yeah, the self-regulation, Chris.
Okay.
Mostly everybody just loses interest after this would pass, and I think it's the door opening where about 4 years from now to take your kids fishing in a public lake would be. I look at it as a form of communism.
Okay, all right. Let's let them answer that. So the self-regulation, if you could describe that and how it would work. Or is there such a thing?
I mean, I suppose, sorry, I'm hung up on how this is possibly communism, but sure.
Okay.
Let me turn back here.
Okay.
For one, my specific quote was that coyotes are able to self-regulate their breeding size to prevent population explosions. Two, the ecosystem itself is a self-regulating thing. I am comfortable with saying that. I mean, humans at this point, our role is mostly going in and mitigating our impact on those kind of things. Three, I'm not saying that the natural world isn't cruel, and that if there's shifts in populations, which I'm not acknowledging would happen, definitely because of this initiative, there are all sorts of factors that put pressures on this thing. Suddenly everybody calling in is afraid of what's going to happen to the poor predator dying of mange, when right now they're okay with their being, trapped and killed in mass. And having coyotes, for the record, have no regulation. It's not, you don't have to, it's a year-round open season on coyotes. It's not, so the idea that suddenly we're worried about what's going to happen, if the predator population ends up expanding or contracting based on many factors is funny to me. I guess the other thing that I would say is that nobody is saying that in the case of specific situations where somebody has to go out and take care of it, that they can't hunt a coyote on public lands. No one's saying that you can't shoot any of the animals that aren't protected by these regulations. And that's not, betraying our constituency or upholding something, counterintuitive to what we're saying. I'm just saying that if we stick to the issue of trapping, it's not the only lethal management tool anyways. So I just think that we're asking for a reasonable compromise that has to do with the fact that trapping puts an undue pressure on our wildlife, on our public lands, that an extreme minority of people get to control the public trust, that it weaponizes things and endangers our pets. And we seem to be really hung up on this predator issue that's more complicated than people are making it seem.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to come back. We're overdue for a break, so I'm going to have Toby comment on that when we come back. Tim, Jeff, Joe, and Andy, everybody wants to talk. We'll try to get as many of you in as we can in the next about 17 minutes, so keep it here. Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Now, we've had quite a few calls pretty much directed at Chris, and so the burden has been on you to talk, and so I haven't given Toby as much opportunity to respond. So please, if you would just, Chris just made some comments a minute ago, if you would like to respond, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. First, I'd like to say that in Montana and elsewhere across the country, in the 46 states where public lands trapping is permitted, and necessary, you cannot shoot a fur bearer. You can shoot a predator animal or a non-game species, but it is illegal to shoot a fur bearer. So the statement that we can just hunt instead is not true. And the FWP, I think, does a good job of managing wildlife, and everything that we do in biology is based on population estimates, and much of that data comes from trappers. And removing trappers from the landscape would also result in a net loss of information for the biologists. So I think that's very important for people to realize. Trapping is necessary as part of a wildlife management tool, not just the act of trapping, but all the data and biological research that comes about because of it.
Okay, what I wanted to do before we get to our next caller, one thing we talked about a little bit that we never really talked about on air is I brought up to you because I'm not an outdoors person at all. Okay, so when I first heard about this, I thought that perhaps this had something to do with the inherent, perceived cruelty of a trap. So is that kind of what you guys are about, or is that just a part of what it's all about, Chris?
It's one of the legs on the stool for sure. And it's something that many of the people that support I-177 and who care about this issue think about. I mean, to think about an animal sitting in a trap for multiple days in agony, being starving, chewing its own leg off, being predated on, is a terrible thing. For me, it's not the issue that I focus on personally, because I think that the issue of non-target catches, of the threat to vulnerable wildlife, the threat to pets and things like that, and the fact that the public trust is being manipulated for a extreme minority to make money are all more salient issues for me personally. It's not that I totally find the cruelty abhorrent, and I'm not going to skirt around that. It kept me up at night for a lot of beginning in this job, but unfortunately, it's one of those things that I've just had to deal with.
So Toby, if you would address that, please.
Yeah, first of all, many anti-hunters use a lot of the same arguments that this anti-trapping body is now using. And so I think there are so many parallels that it would be hard to argue that this is not an anti-hunting, anti-trapping, anti-fishing ballot initiative. The second thing is that, trappers, by and large, I guess the trapping groups in Montana are a minority. That is true. But we provide a service to the hunters of Montana at a cost that is actually negative. We do it for free. Doesn't cost the taxpayers any money. And I-177 would just increase the cost exorbitantly. And I think it's just inarguable.
Okay, let's move on and get back to the phone. And Tim has been waiting the longest. Hi, Tim. You're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks. I think we need a quick history lesson here. About 10 years ago, the Cattle Association...
Has to be really quick because we're running out of time.
That's all right. FWP and the state legislature made it a trespass charge to coyote hunt on land that wasn't posted. So FWP and the Cattle Association are creating the problem that they now have to live with. So I really don't care about their whining. And as far as the gentleman from Arizona, they're already shooting coyotes out of the air. We've seen that in Lima, Dillon, Choteau, and Augusta. My question for Toby is, if the Cattle Association and the landowners continue to lock out the coyote hunters, why should we even care if they lose cattle? Because they created the problem. Let them deal with it.
Okay, thanks for the call. So, Toby, what do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think the important thing to focus on is that there is a extreme expense, an increase in cost incurred to the taxpayers of Montana and to the private landowners and ranchers in the state. And so one thing that's also important to recognize is that all of those methods, aerial gunning, trapping, poisoning, shooting, etc., cost money. All of this result of I-177 costs money.
Okay, we're going to take we have a 1-minute timeout. It's our last break, and we'll try to get as many calls in as we can. So I'm going to ask you, when we put you on, to please state your question immediately, if you can, and that way we can get more callers in. So we'll be right back. Stay with us. We're back on Talkback, and we are running out of time, and there's so many people that want to get on. I've never seen the phones this busy. So last time we talked about weeds, I think it was we had this many calls, John.
When we talk about weed, we also get a lot of calls.
All right, let's get Jeff on the line. Jeff, thanks for holding. What's on your mind? Hello, Jeff? Who am I speaking with?
He's not in.
All right, not there. Okay, so let's go directly to Joe. All right, Joe, you're on Talkback. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, my question's directed towards Chris. Now, this initiative will eliminate trapping on public ground of such animals as squirrels, gophers, skunks, things of that sort. How will it affect, like me, when I set up my wall tent for 2 weeks during hunting season, I set mouse traps in there for mice. Does that mean that that'll be illegal also?
All right. So I'm assuming that's a serious question. Is that
mouse traps inside a wall tent?
Yeah.
For one, I don't think anybody was going to pursue that. I don't know. I guess from what I understand of the interpretation of the language that we've written, and again, when you write an initiative, you write it out, and then the state helps you form it to state law, is that putting a trap out on public lands is inherently going to be outlawed. But I mean, we talked, I guess I can't speak to a tent, but we talked, about what happens if people put a mousetrap inside a cabin on public lands, and that was, we were told that wouldn't be a concern.
All right. Let's move along, because I don't want to give too much time to that question. Andy, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Good morning. Just a quick comment. I just wanted to point out that beavers, which have been discussed here as pests, are the most important animal to North American wildlife because they expand riparian areas, and riparian areas are the most productive wildlife-producing areas. So every hunter benefits from a lot of beavers on the landscape.
Okay, what's your question?
No specific question, but I want to point out the importance of beavers, and it's been overlooked in many conversations. So just
okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Thanks for your call. Let's just move along. All right, Mike's on the line. Mike, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make this short. I'm speaking for a very large group of Montanans that I know and a large group of Montana trappers that I know. We are veterans. We put our life on the line, and we put our life on the line. We say we'll die for your freedoms. When we come back, you people got the audacity to say that public land belongs to everybody, but you veterans who pick up a trap, stay the heck off our public land. You didn't earn a right to be there, and we damn sure earned a right a whole lot better than you did. So how do you address this?
All right, thanks, Mike. So he's feeling put upon because he's a veteran and feels he's earned the right to do that.
I mean, there's an extent to which I can't seriously answer that question because it doesn't really relate. I would say that many members of my family served in the armed services. I don't think that anybody is anti-veteran. There are tons of veterans that support what we do. And again, it's not like everybody's like, oh, it would be so fun to go out and prevent 6,000 people from doing what they want to do. You know what I mean? What it comes down to is that there is 1 million people that get to use this land in public trust. And when something creates a situation in which a disproportionate amount of those people can't do what they want to do, then it creates an issue where you have to look at that trust as utilitarian. And I do want to say one thing that I would address directly to this is that we keep talking about this $2 or $3 million that if you count the sale of furs that trapping brings into the state, but one of the single largest economic drivers of the state is ecotourism is non-consumptive use of people coming to view wildlife, which generates $500 million in revenue in the state and is the most common use of public lands. And so it's about a balance that holds the trust for everyone.
Go ahead, John.
I guess my question is a follow-up. It's something you've talked about a few times, is the idea that there's conflict of interest when it comes to different people using the land, and that trappers are taking away the opportunity of using the land for others, and utilitarianism would support banning trapping. Is that a fair summation of your argument there?
Sure. I mean, I think it's more nuanced than that, but I think that for the sake of time, yeah.
So I guess my question is, if that's the case, how are their rights in conflict? I mean, how are trappers hurting anyone else from using the land?
For one, trapping is one of the only uses of public lands that can be done for a profit. Two, it weaponizes public lands because you don't know where traps are, and trappers can put an unlimited number of traps on the ground. Three, it catches people's pets. Four, it affects negatively and unintentionally through both discriminate and indiscriminate catches. It affects the total population of animals that are being harvested for fur, and we keep getting away from that issue. And so animals we hold in public trust are being brought in for and sold for profit for an individual, and also it reduces the total health of that population, and it makes it so, you worry about what your kids do in the future. Well, I want my kids to get to see a fisher someday.
Well, here's the problem we have. Almost all the questions have been directed at Chris. So you've had a lot of time to speak, and we haven't had a lot of time for Toby. So we have a minute and a half left in the show. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to state your case here. Toby, go ahead.
Thanks. Logging, mushroom picking, antler harvest from dropped antlers, fishing, outfitting and guiding, ranching on public lands. All these things are ways that individuals can utilize public lands to make money. So there are just a long list of ways to do that. Also, speaking about ecotourism, it's pretty interesting. I think because Montana has a long-standing wildlife management system that involves hunting, trapping, and fishing, interesting thing I found this morning, a record 4,097,710 visitors visited Yellowstone National Park last year. That's more than 16% that it was in 2014. And looking at future statistics, we expect to see another record year in 2016, and we'll find that out soon. And I think that it's just goes to show that our wildlife management system works. Ecotourism is at an all-time high, record highs. More people than ever are using Montana and coming here to visit, and I think that's fantastic, and I think it's a result of good wildlife management principles that include trapping.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here today, stating your cases very eloquently. Chris Justice, Executive Director of Footloose Montana, Toby Walroth, President of the Montana Trappers Association. Ladies and gentlemen, you have the information. When you go to the ballot box, make your choice. So have a great day.